forgot really quickly.
Thanks,
I'm also the child of a strange Stanford designed major that you have to explain to people. So I really appreciate hearing your perspective on that too. I love Simpsons.
Well, that was a great life lesson, is that the great thing about having a major you have to explain is you get to tell people how to think about it. They don't have a preconceived notion how to think about it. So you get to tell them how to think about it. It's what you tell them it is. So symbolic systems was my major, and that was formative. But then also there was this sort of side dish that was, you know, liberal arts institution, check the box of a foreign language. I rounded up. Instead of rounding out my 2 years of high school Latin and sort of being able to check the box with a little more Latin in college, I thought I'd try a living language. And because Latin was the basis of the Romance languages, and I sort of at least had a foothold in Western languages, I was curious about Eastern ones. And my own parents' native tongue, Tamil, wasn't on offer. So I flipped a coin between Chinese and Japanese. And in the early 90s, Japan, what a difference a year or 10 makes, was so much, seemed so relevant, being on the Pacific Rim and looking at industry and technology. And there was, China was in the background, honestly, and Japan was right up in the front. So I took Japanese. It was really on a lark. Loved it so much that, long story short, ended up applying to study abroad in Japan by the time I got to my junior year. I kept taking Japanese long past fulfilling the requirement. And I ended up studying abroad under Stanford's auspices in Japan my junior year, and living in a host family's home. And it was amazing, amazing experience. One of those transformative things that happens when you transplant yourself around the globe. And I met a couple of guys in Japan on that program. They were PhD candidates when I was an undergrad. Jerry Yang and David Philo, who a few years later would go on to co-found Yahoo. But sticking with being in Japan and just being an undergrad, they're just a couple of graduate students, PhD candidates that were kind of being glorified TAs for their professor, who was on sabbatical, or not even on sabbatical, but was teaching at the Stanford in Japan Center for that portion of the year. So they just followed him along, kind of tagged along to sort of be his TAs. So they were full members of the program, and we just got to be very close, and we got to be great friends. And it was a veritable digression in any way from our planned lives for all of us to be in Japan. And of course, ended up being profoundly consequential that we all got to know each other there. And I just think that that's such a, again, typical, perfect liberal arts story, and of which there are just a million, you know. And then upon graduating, finally came back from Japan, graduated, and worked for a large-scale artificial intelligence project for 2 years, the Psych project, CYC. So to my shock, I got a job out of college that was relevant to my undergraduate degree. And I honestly did not know that that was possible. I didn't plan on it. I didn't bank on it. I couldn't believe someone was going to pay me to basically do my philosophy midterms and write first-order logic sentences from English. But it happened. I could tell the story about how that happened, but anyway, it was a revelation to me that I could work for a living in the field that I studied as an undergrad, because like a good Indian girl, I was always going to go to graduate school. And undergrad was never going to define my career. That was what graduate school was for. But a couple of years after graduating and well ensconced in the Psych project, Jerry Yang and David Philo, my buddies from Japan, asked if I wanted to go to lunch, and I thought we were just having lunch. And it's when they broached the idea of joining their then fledgling idea of Yahoo. They had just gotten their first round of venture capital funding and made the hard decision to leave their PhDs and give this an honest go. Instead of just selling it outright to somebody and finishing their PhDs, they were like, let's roll the dice. Let's see what we can make of this. Let's see if we can build a company. So I was the 5th employee there, and I'll take any questions at all about the next 15 and a half years that I couldn't possibly sum up here. I'll just say it was a 15 and a half year epic set of epochs on the front row of the emergence and crazy ascendance and then utter dominance of tech in industry. Lots to say about that, and lots to say to compare it to today's tech. Lots to say about any questions you have about being female in tech, or what of tech, or what's anything. What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? All of that. but it was life 101. Those were extraordinary 15 plus years of learning everything there is to learn about anything that you could want to know. Because of the nature of the job, I was editor-in-chief. It just meant I had my finger in so many different pots, conceptually, like subject-wise, organizationally. I had this nice horizontal role in the company, so I kind of had an excuse to poke around in all areas. Just learning. And for 10 of those 15 years, and I'm getting to the end of my little pepper here, for 10 of those 15 years, I had a different side dish. I carved out a little time to serve on the board of a nonprofit devoted to jazz called SF Jazz in San Francisco. And it was the side-by-side experience of being fully steeped in this crazy roller coaster of tech and capitalism on this side, and to be on the board of this nonprofit arts organization on the other side that led to so many questions, thoughts, wishes, beliefs around art and commerce, tech, capitalism, the human condition. And really long story short, ultimately, fast forward, after I did leave Yahoo and spent a good couple of years with no end game, wanting to sort of just reset, replant, who am I, where am I, found myself co-founding Louvre, which is my labor of love to date, all about providing a model for music where our markets are led by artistic values instead of having our arts and culture led by market values. And so Louvre is my labor of love now with my co-founder, Josh, in Brooklyn. And I live in Brooklyn half the time when we don't have a year like this one. And so I can answer any questions about that. And my other sort of areas of focus today besides Louvre are that I serve on Stanford's Board of Trustees, which is a great perch from which to think about higher ed broadly, Stanford specifically, this place from which I've obviously gotten a lot, and my siblings, my family, but I also think owes a lot to the world, and a lot should be expected of it. So I like that puzzle. And finally, sort of, and now for something really different, except that it's all connected for me. I've been really enjoying for a couple of years, after spending a couple of years in a deep inquiry around mobility and poverty in this country on something called the U.S. Partnership for Mobility from Poverty, where I just learned a lot about one very, very stubbornly hard problem. I spent a couple of years with a group of kindred spirits just volunteering to beat our heads against the wall about the idea of American truth and reconciliation. What would racial reconciliation be in this? So another hard problem to hit our head against for kicks. And those two weirdly led me to the last couple of years where I've been really deeply engaged in an almost metaphysical inquiry about the nature of money and how we can reimagine our relationship to money and what would be unleashed if we could change how we conceive of money, money being this most significant unconscious agreement among people around the globe. So it's sort of a very high lever for change. So there's just a lot of thoughtlets, and I welcome open any and all questions. What I didn't talk about in there, which is actually super relevant and important as far as my life goes, and if we were just sitting down over coffee or wine, would be relationships, some of the most important stuff and what I've learned. So I really am an open book. We can talk about, women and the feminine. We can talk about tech or art and arts or jazz. I have so much to say about jazz, oh my gosh. And plenty of other things that I could go on and on and on. So I'll stop there and open it up. You're muted, Matt, but I think you're talking.
We got about 20 people online here right now, so I would appreciate if people would direct their questions to the group chat, and then we'll moderate that as they come in, probably first come, first served. Maddie and I will go through there and try to see what's going on and pass them on to Srinija. So any questions? The floor is open.
And I have so many more things I'm dying to talk about. Even so, if you decide to be quiet, you're going to hear my voice anyway.
Here, I have one that I'll ask maybe while people are thinking about it and formulating their thoughts in the chat. But I'd love to hear more about your thesis on the idea behind being more driven by art and culture and how that process has been for you.
Yeah, this is where a lot of streams are sort of converging, and ultimately this inquiry about money itself. What is its nature? How can we reimagine it? So 2008, Yahoo, if you were inside this crazy bubble of tech, it would have been it was a nadir for the company. Nadir, how do you say that word? You couldn't read the word Yahoo in a magazine without it being surrounded by words like struggling, suffering, beleaguered, once lofty internet pioneer Yahoo. It was just a dog by any estimation. But I'm inside the company, and I am not a finance jock, but I can see a balance sheet and realize this is a company that has a few $1 billion in cash, virtually no debt, and we throw off like $100 million of cash flow a month. That's just what the business, that's just cash flow. Like, so it's a $1.2 billion cash flow balance sheet, right? A year. And I'm thinking, and we have, we employ maybe, I don't know, 15,000 people around the globe or something like that, right? In a couple dozen countries. So I think, and we serve like 600 million users at the time. So, nothing about that is struggling or suffering or beleaguered or a dog. And it's early 2008, and the markets are pummeling our leadership for somehow supposedly, allegedly failing to consummate a deal with Microsoft, wherein allegedly, as the story goes, they put an offer on the table to buy our company for like $50 billion. And what I don't know, even if that's true, which is not verified that it was even a good faith offer on the table, let's say it was, and let's say we said no. Let's say Jerry and David, our co-founders, failed to consummate the deal. Why is that not, like, what is this my kindergarten brain is like, why is that a bad idea? Like prima facie, why is 1 + 1 greater than 2? Mergers and acquisitions, empirically, they fail 8 or 9 times out of 10. That's just truth, that's just history. And there's a reason for that, because companies aren't numbers that you throw into a funnel and crunch and come out as numbers. They're human beings. And if you try to put Jerry Yang, our then CEO, with Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's then CEO, what a train wreck. They're just totally different human beings, and they would have created totally different cultures, and 1 + 1 won't even be 2. It'll be less than 2. You will diminish both, But, so why do we keep falling for this fallacy? And on the art side, on the SF Jazz chairing the board of a nonprofit side, it occurred to me, you know what? Nobody has ever said, Sonny Rollins should buy Ornette Coleman. Like, in the arts, we are more impervious to the fallacy of 1 + 1 being greater. We are more resilient with the understanding that humans are irreducible. There's an irreducible quality to our humanity, that there is an invaluable nature to that, and that the world is better with Sonny and Ornette. Isn't the world better with Yahoo and Microsoft? Why do you want to make one bigger thing? What is gained and what is lost? So that was the beginning of an inquiry about, in the arts, what is it about the arts that keeps us a little more resilient, a little less prone to this stupid fallacy that can commit again and again and again in our economic behavior about counting and accounting and calculus and humanity and the value of it and the value of life. And since we made money up, since we just invented it, surely we didn't invent it to become slaves to it. We didn't invent money so that we could employ human capital to serve market values. We invented money so that we could employ market capital to serve human values. Or else what good is it? So it's like, how do you shift the bit, and how do we remember what it was there for? And what would it look like for the arts to lead an economic model instead of the economic market values of the day leading our arts and culture, which is what has happened in the last quarter century as the internet basically has sort of become our music companies, our TV companies, our entertainment companies, our arts and culture, you know? I can still say more, but I'll stop there because I know that's a lot of blah, blah, blah.
So we have a question from the audience. Kevin says, what's the most significant way that the tech industry has changed since you joined it? And as a woman in tech, that early on, what was your biggest challenge?
Yeah. So I'll give an anecdote or a specific that you can extrapolate from for how has it changed. There was a minute, and if you were not born in the 1900s as I was, or if you graduated out past the 1900s, I graduated in the 1900s, you might not realize this. There was a minute at the dawn of the internet industry, before Netscape went public, when Yahoo was born, when the culture and the ethos of the industry or the people making companies was radically communitarian, it didn't resemble what I learned in the front row seat on this roller coaster for the next 15 years was how swift and comprehensive the overturn happens, where money and the consolidation of obscene amounts of money topples that value system. So I got to be in an environment where the DNA was formed that we were a media company. The first business plan said we were a media company. Just think about that. That's one of a million things I could say that was true about Yahoo, that was 180 degrees different about Google that followed us or Facebook that followed them. So think about the tech behemoths today, and this is just tech, right? Not only do they not acknowledge that they're media companies, they resist it vigorously. They refuse on the witness stand in Congress to say they're a media company, okay? What does that mean? What is the consequence of that framing? When you start with the premise that you're a media company, what is the word media? It's in between, medium. It's we are human beings employing technology to serve and affect human beings. If you start with that premise, a whole host of questions, responsibilities, and priorities emerge. If you start with the premise that you are just a neutral tech platform, a whole host of different responsibilities get abdicated. They just like, poof, go away. And it's profoundly consequential. And it is far more profitable to abdicate the responsibility. So Yahoo got bought by Verizon. I mean, that was a lifetime later in internet years, but we don't remember these things. You know what I mean? What won the day? What is still here? What has more money than God is the one that gets to have their cake and eat it too, which this is a problem. We're all complicit in this problem. What are we asking of each other? What are we expecting of each other? What are we, yeah. So to me, the biggest change has to do with what happened. It started off, I would say, for all intents and purposes, even today, we've really, when we say technology, the word tech, it's a shorthand for digital, because, you know, there was a time that eyeglasses were technology, but today the word tech means digital. For all intents and purposes, we've really seen tech on capitalism. We haven't seen tech on humanism. So there is wide open greenfield for where we can go with this, what we could employ it for if we flip the bit and have a different values hierarchy. And there was a minute at the beginning that is long forgotten, where actually, because the markets hadn't gotten there, the stock market hadn't existed, Netscape hadn't gotten public, there was no gold rush, where there were humans asking what of these new capacities and how could we use it to enhance life on Earth? And then the money. So again, coming back to what is money for? What would it mean to remember that we invented it to employ market capital to serve human values, not to employ human capital to serve market values. As a woman, I will say it wasn't not a thing. It's a thing then. It's a bigger thing now. What I mean by that is I had to deal with nerd culture. I didn't for the first X years have to deal with bro culture. Nerd culture, geek culture, I can swing with the geeks. I can swing with the nerds. Like, give me 15 seconds to make my case and then we're on equal footing. Like, we can, you know what I mean? Like, no, like any presumptions go away and now it's Star Trek and we're just all cool, okay? But bro culture is another thing altogether. I can't go there. I won't go there. No fiber of my being wants to go there. Do you know what I mean? That's a, so once, it's one thing to have nerd culture that maybe makes the first barrier, but then you can get past that, where there was a lot of actually there was huge lack of meritocracy to get in the first place, because like you got to, why did I get to Yahoo? Because I got to go to Stanford and I got to meet some people in Japan and. So huge inequality about getting there. But if you're there, I will say it is more meritocratic than most industries in that sense, gender-wise. Until bro culture comes along, now we got a different issue.
Well, thank you very much. While you've been talking, I think we've had maybe 20 questions came in. The floodgates opened up. So maybe we can take about 2 or 3 minutes with each one of these so we can get to as many people as possible.
Can I just say, I'm just scanning. So my partner, Wayne Winborn, is the executive director of the Institute of Jazz Studies at Rutgers, Newark. It's the world's largest archive for jazz. It's a marvelous, marvelous gem of an institution. And so, and he's dear friends with Wendell Pierce. I had the privilege and pleasure, I just see this, I had the privilege and pleasure of being in London last year when Wendell was doing Death of a Salesman, which was just a race-breaking, it was, whoa. And we got to just have a long, late hang with Wendell after the show. And no, he's just a heavyweight, but he's also a dear, dear human being. And he is doing great work in Louisiana, and et cetera. So
I wanted you to know, if you did know, that he was a presidential scholar and an advisor.
You know what? I didn't realize that. I didn't even make that connection, because I will say that the person he was dating when I was there, I think they're still together, she went to like Shawnee Mission something, which was only which we used to play in volleyball in Lawrence, Kansas. So there was all these other common threads. So I love the small world.
Next time, mention it.
I love that. I will. I love that. There's so many things I want to talk about. I actually would love to talk a little about jazz because it's been so much on my mind. But first, just because it pops out, how did you make the decision to leave Yahoo? I would love to take that one, just because I think these questions about how we make choices is kind of the end all be all. So one thing for me about how to make choices goes back to what my sister told me. I think you'd like symbolic systems because you really like the people in symbolic systems. So above all else, who am I surrounding myself with in my days? Who's the hang? Everything follows from that. I don't care what the role is. I don't care what the title is. I don't care what the money is. It's utterly irrelevant compared to that. And why I decided to leave Yahoo, the hardest thing about leaving was the who, because these are my people. I mean, I grew up with this place. This is and I had the luxury of being in this sort of founding group, this primordial group. So I got to create my own little environment in there, of my making. So these were really my people. But what I began to see was I saw a moment at the beginning of 2010 where a critical organizational decision was made by the executive team that signaled something to me about values, about priorities, and about the role of editorial and policy, which was my thing. And I said, that's telling. But I also said, I'm not going to make a rash decision in a week after 15 years. Like, I'm going to give it a lot more time. And I'm going to try to turn over a lot of stones. Like, I've been here all this time. I want to have a good exit. And the one thing I learned after being somewhere for 15 years you're a dinosaur in tech if you stay somewhere 15 years. Nobody else in the company except for the 2 founders were there that long. So all you do is watch people leave. You have to say goodbye to your friends all the time. But what that showed me was I had a lot of lessons about how to leave, because you see most people who just leave. And then you see some people who leave well. And I really wanted to leave well because I owe this place, because it's given me so much. And even if it hadn't, I want to be a person who leaves well. So that's something I learned, was just the idea of leaving well. I just want to say, I think that really matters. I think it should matter as much as arriving well. We put so much into the arrivals and the welcomes and the onboarding. I think we need to leave well. And I was able to take 10 months of that year to sort of try this, try that, poke this, poke that, and sort of lay the ground for succession until it was very clear, okay, I think I've learned what I'm supposed to learn, and I've given what I'm supposed to give, and with grace I can go, and with thanks I can go, and not with bitterness and not with anger, but with, there are people, like the next chapter is for other people. It's for other people's energy, it's for other people's ingenuity. My team, I had the best team I had ever had when I left. So it was like, there's a saying in Japan, leave when the cherry blossoms are full. Those moments are rare, but it was the best team I could ever have. They were each better at their function than I was. And so I knew that if I left, it would be sort of a non-thing, or, relatively non-thing. And I recognize that's a fragile perfection, and it's like, get the hell out, because like, don't wait for the next moment where now you're trapped, you can't leave. Because I had the moments where I couldn't leave. 2008 was a moment I swore I wouldn't leave. Like, I'm not going to leave when the going gets rough. I'm not going to leave when Jerry and David are being lambasted. I'm staying in the foxhole with them now. You know what I mean? So it was cherry blossoms are full, and it was just time for a new energy that was forward looking. Yeah.
Do you want to just keep going down the list and picking the questions you like?
Yeah, sure. These are so great. I'm going to say something about jazz just because it is where there's so much to say. I think I just want to, so let me just start there. I was originally drawn to jazz just because in 4th grade or 5th grade, when you get to start band and you have to pick an instrument, I was like, well, how do you pick an instrument? Like, if you don't play them, how do you pick one? And I had piano lessons and voice lessons up to that point, but not like what horn to pick up or whatever, drums. And my brother said, so my sister said, you like the people in Suboxis. My brother said, why don't you pick a jazz instrument? It's like, because then you can play jazz. And we can argue about the fact that there's no such thing as a jazz, anything can be a jazz instrument, of course, but there are some maybe more canonically jazz instruments. And so I sort of was like, oh, there are enough dudes playing trumpet, I'm gonna play the sax. And so I just followed alto saxophone, and all that meant was it was just sort of an invitation to learn something about a genre. And I'm in Lawrence, Kansas, in the shadow of Kansas City. There's all kinds of, so it's in the air. And I just think socioculturally, being brown in Kansas, there's probably plenty of things that on a subconscious level just hit me in the right places. And it was as I got older that I really came to appreciate it, not just on an aesthetic level, and not just that it's cool and it's hip and it's fun. All of those things are true. But today, I would write manifestos about what kind of country has a unique history that gives birth to an art form this liberating and doesn't shout it from the rooftops and teach it in every 1st grade. I mean, what is that? What is that? And it goes to all the questions of reckoning that we're facing right now. And why do you have to go to Europe, and why do you have to go to Japan to find more diehard jazz fans, jazz patrons, and enthusiasts and people who know it? And because it is exactly because it's our unique history that it's so hard. but it's the honey that helps the medicine go down when and if we're ready to properly, totally, really deal with, reckon with, metabolize the fullness of our history. Because it is not coincidental that the country with this history gave rise to an art form that didn't, it's not hierarchical and didactic. There isn't, that its hallmark is improvisation, not the precise written score. That to be an improviser of the highest order, yes, all the things people have said about jazz and democracy is true and it's important. Yes, the listening and the collaboration and the unlikely mix of sounds and instruments that hadn't gotten together before, and the gumbo of culture that could only happen from our unique history. All those things are true. But the thing I think that gets missed, and we need to really, I think now we can start to talk about, is the rigorous initiation and preparation required to get on the bandstand to be an improviser. What does it mean to be an improviser? It means to show up on a bandstand with people you may or may not have ever talked to before, and to co-create spontaneously in such a way that the whole is greater than the sum, that there is a coherent beauty that emerges. Not only do you have to be radically listening, but you have to be radically self-aware. So the initiation and preparation to be curious enough to listen on that level, humble enough to listen on that level, but self-aware enough to say, I know who I am. So that in the moment, I can sense my highest, best use. Who do I need to be so that you can be who you're meant to be? If I don't know who I am, if I haven't done my work, if I'm wondering what does it say about me that you are X, Y, and Z? If I'm still worrying about how what you do reflects on me, I'm going to be a shitty improviser. I'm going to be the annoying one that is just the alpha male that says too much, or I'm going to be the one that just doesn't know when to squawk in, or that makes like the wrong note at the wrong time. You know, it's not additive. It's not generative. It's not. But a mediocre jazz combo on an average day does a better job of collaborating than most of us do, because the initiation and preparation to get there in the first place. And I think that's something that maybe, I just find that to be so instructive, and it's so inspiring, and it's so humbling, and it's possible. And it's there, it's all in there. It shows us every day how we need to be and what we can be to enter this next epoch together, to do something humans haven't figured out how to do before, live together across diversity by forming an emergent collective wisdom where everyone is needed and no one is centered. Everyone is needed and no one is centered. If you think about the jazz combo and improvisation, if you drop the piano out, if you drop the bass out, if you drop the horn out, like it's missing, but no one is centered. Yes, you get to solo. Yes, you get your moment everyone's needed, no one is centered. So I just think there's so much richness to mine, and it's there waiting for us. It's just waiting for us. It's gonna teach us, you know. What is so looking at money, I'd love to talk about money. And feel free to like yell out if there's if anyone wants to +1 a question so that it's not only what I want to talk about, because I can tell you. But I'll come back to money. Had you pegged as a sax player, I love that. I'll take it as a compliment. Okay, so let me say something about money. Something I'm only learning now, or really getting good with now, like making it explicit. It was implicit. It goes to the feminine, the masculine, yin yang. You know, okay, so I actually pulled this out. Well, this is I really am an analog girl. This is my big high-tech presentation. The top is a yin yang symbol. It says duality. The bottom is zeros and ones. It says binary. And this is like the East-West. This is the bicultural upbringing, right? That this one symbol just comes to me every single day. And it's so not American in a way. It's because America is more about clarity, linearity, certainty, right, left, liberal, conservative, on, off, yes, no, better, worse. And Eastern cultures and Eastern traditions, wisdom traditions, just have a way of dealing with paradox and nuance and contradiction and wholeness. I just think the longer you're on a planet, the more you have no choice to deal with wholeness and the inextricable interbeing of everything, So I think we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're young. We got a lot to figure out. And so the reason this comes up a lot because I talk about tech and I talk about what's at stake for the human condition in a technological era, in a digital, when tech means digital. And that the essence of the human condition is steeped in this kind of duality, this non-binary duality of wholeness. And that even the minute I even use a word, and we have to use words, we have to employ language to make sense of the world, to start categorizing and parsing things. But the second I say notebook, I am equally invoking not notebook, because the thing is entailed with its not thing, because a thing only is a thing in relation to what is not that thing. And so we're always dealing with this fact that there is wholeness, but we're separating, and it's against a backdrop of wholeness, and not only wholeness, but that like notebook contains not notebook. You know what I mean? Like they need each other. Justice is only possible because injustice is stubborn. That's why we have the noble pursuit of justice. Otherwise, it would just be Tuesday and everyone would get along all the time, So this thing about money is, we've had a long, long, long history of employing economic systems, currency, monetary systems that are very yang, they're very masculine. They are about clarity, linearity, hierarchy, power over, top down. It's about scarcity mentality. That's where, and there's a place for that. There's actually, that's useful in its place, but the yin yang shows us we need balance, and we've really, really suppressed the yin part of that balance that talks about not the zero-sum math of scarcity and competition, but the infinite abundance of what the natural world shows us. The whole is greater than the sum math that I was speaking of before in the business context. If you're stuck in a scarcity mentality and you're dealing with our monetary system, where we literally we issue more lending, we lend more money than there is reserves to back it up. That's how the regulatory system works. It's how it regulates the banks who make money. They just make it out of nothing, and the Fed makes it out of nothing. But there is this dance that happens that puts a cap on how much currency to issue against how much is lent. We lend more. What does that mean? It means if I lend you $100 and you're going to owe me $110 because of interest, where's that extra 10 coming from? It's coming from competing with all you other suckers for 10 that don't exist. That's bonkers. We could do it differently. We could have a currency that reflects the abundance in it, and greater sum, whole is greater than the sum, generative math of relationship and trust, of what happens, again, in our natural life. Like Khalil Gibran says, you may say you would give, but only to the deserving. The trees in your orchard say not so. They give that they may live, because to withhold is to perish. What if we each figure out what is our gifts to give, and who do I need to be so that you can be who you are meant to be? My gift isn't for me. It's my gift. I don't need it. I can't even hoard it. I perish under that weight. You have to come up here so I can give it. The flower has to bloom so the bee can pollinate it. That's not for the bee, but because the flower flowers, the bee gets to be a bee, right? So, and then what happens? Something happens that each of them couldn't have done on their own. That's generative. So how do we make a currency that is yin? And we have some alternate currencies around the world that do this. Any co-op does this in some way, shape, or form, because it's based in relationship. But we have even more interesting models, and you can start looking up alternate currencies and just see, like, even yin-based, more feminine, like, that are relationship-based, trust-based, time-based. If you talk about things where you're measuring time and not and enforcing that everyone's sort of putting in time. Then it makes, like, think about a local PTA and the peer pressure to sort of, you can't just phone it in and you can't just write the $100 check. You actually have to bake the cupcakes. You know what I mean? That's a more pressure-based sort of peer pressure thing, but think about a positive version of that. Think about my music teacher in grade school that made a point system in her class. She just made up a currency. She was the Fed of her classroom, but the rules for her currency and how we got points were her rules, and they were music rules, and they were kind of cool. You have to behave, and you have to all behave. And if somebody doesn't behave, then that's on the whole class and you lose points, you know? Like, wow, that's a great currency that promotes interbeing and supporting each other and holding each other up. And then we all get richer. And so that's some thoughts off the top of my head about, like, what would other ways of dealing with money be? But I will say that even in the money system that we have now, and even as it exists now within Western capitalism, with all its problems and limitations, there is so much room for improvement even within the constrictors. That's what Louvre is about. Louvre is about saying, without even making a new alternate currency or reinventing the currency that we have in the monetary system that we have, can we just tell way bigger stories? Can we just tell way bigger stories? Because fair trade coffee and artisanal chocolate bars and Priuses and conflict-free diamonds show us that when you tell a way bigger story, a meaningful number of people want to align their behavior with their values, and they want to contribute to a narrative that is generative. They don't want to keep being a consumer in a scarcity-driven marketplace. It's just demeaning, it's dehumanizing, it limits all of us, and it is ennobling. And it's why do I proudly carry my cloth bag to the farmer's market when my 7-year-old would have thought you're a sucker to go to a less convenient place to buy a more expensive apple that's less pretty, and you can't get it 12 months in a year. And my 49-year-old self proudly carries that cloth bag because it's a badge of honor, it's an identity signifier that I'm aligning with a value system that is giving the earth something to give me more apples. I'm not just getting apples, I'm creating the conditions for more apples. So how to tell way bigger stories.
So that actually is an interesting lead in to a question from Aunt Felice, who understands all of us better than we will ever. And she asked, you mentioned the 5-year-old in you. You just talked about that. How else you were like that child? In other words, how are your long-term core characteristics manifested in your life historically and today?
I think that when I said that I was born downstream of so much love, I just think that what carries above every other thing is I think I just knew that out the gate. And it's always I get older that I'm recognizing and unspeakably grateful that is how I got to come into the world. I mean, how I understand that is rare. To know it, to be born downstream of a lot of love, and then to also know that you are, to actually know it. Can't quite tell you how that came about, but being the youngest child with some really caring older siblings and grounded centered parents who had the bravery to, like, leave everything they knew from their gene pool and move to the other side of the planet, you know, that's some pretty good soil, fertile soil for knowing it. So I'd say in that respect, there is kind of like an existential okayness about my 5-year-old self that has been a through line. And my 5-year-old self was actually had already had a couple of years of piano lessons and was just starting voice lessons and was starting to act in plays. And I'm not doing any of those things right now, but the arts are a massive part of my life and a massive part of what matters to me. And I think the Hindu upbringing, it wasn't explicit. I don't even know if it would be explicit in a Vedic text, but it was implicit. My mom was in art history. Her second master's was in art history. Her first master's was in Sanskrit before she went on to computer science, that midlife shift. So she's a polymath. My dad was a mathematician. He's no longer with us. But both of them had a deep reverence for the arts. So I grew up in a house where we had beautiful art objects that they lugged from India, in coach, the bronze sculpture that they had to lug as their carry-on. But I also grew up with a reverence for the performing arts, where they would like host Zakir Hussain in my living room for a recital because they were sponsoring him to do a concert at the University of Kansas. And I didn't understand how cool that was. But what I've come to understand is in their cosmology, the artist, the divine is in me as it is in you, the sort of tenet of Hinduism. In the artist, the divine is even more manifestly expressed, right? It's like they're a little closer to God. And so I think I just kind of knew that, and think about how different that is than what at least a lot of my, I guess, American friends, where is the arts in the hierarchy of things? I don't see it have this elevated, revered status, but at least in my house, and I think it brought more broadly in culture, that's more true. So that's true of my 5-year-old self, and it's true of today, where I think I'm arts adjacent. People ask me if I'm an artist because I'm involved in the arts. I get the question if you're an artist, and I'm like, oh, I'm definitely not an artist. I'm arts adjacent. I'm artist adjacent but it is something about a reverence for being just closer to the divine.
If I may plus one on that question, I had posted a little below that. Are there other aspects of being the youngest child? Because you mentioned that at the beginning. Are there other aspects of being a youngest child that matter beyond what you've already said?
A lot of things were just maybe a little easier because someone had stepped the steps before. So on the one hand, there's that, but on the other hand, there's the opportunity to like aggressively forge a different path, so that you're not falling into that groove, so that you're sure that you're figuring out who you are. So I like the mix, I guess, of how I got to do both of those things and sort of make choices about where to take advantage of the following and where to assert the leading. I don't think it's for any of you who have older siblings, I'm guessing, I don't want to presume, that somewhere in your subconscious, if not your conscious, a lot of choices are framed by sort of not following the lane that's already occupied. And there's still an infinite amount of space left, but it does start to create, right? So I don't know if that's better or worse, but it's been, I have no regrets. Like, I like it. I like the combination of like the security of having them just a step ahead, but the sovereignty to say, here's where I'm gonna be a rebel. What is about youngest? There's a certain, I don't know, in my family, I think it was just better. I can't account for it. I didn't deserve it, but like, you're cute longer in their memory. You know what I mean? Like, once the youngest, always the youngest. My brother still calls me kiddo. I love that. Oh, and then also because it's 3, there are things that by the time it got to me, my parents were a little chill. So that was cool. And also by the time it got to me, my parents were less concerned, not unconcerned, but less concerned about certain things that end up being very useful for me. Like, when are you going to get married and when are you going to have a kid? For example, because they got their weddings, they got their grandkids. I get to do my thing.
All right. Well, we're just about at an hour right now, and I wanted to respect your time. On the other hand, if you're willing to stick around and answer some more questions, I think we have some that haven't been asked yet. So let us know. You want to stick around some more? Or you tired and want to go to bed?
No, it's early on the West Coast. I'm good. I'm delighted if I can be, if it's of interest. You all are very generous to listen.
Well, I noticed one early on that we sort of skipped over, and I apologize. This was, hold on, let me get to it.
And Matt, I don't know I don't know the sax player. I'll have to look it up. I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was just looking at that. I was thinking of someone that you probably might like to know. I was just amazed.
No, I want to know. I want to know.
Here it is. Alex ask, with respect to your technical background, do you think that the best, that is the most advanced, most novel tech or algorithms win, regardless of other business factors, or does the business side really control your success or play a large role?
I'm no expert here, but no, I think the business side has a huge, I'd say the business side has a bigger role. So I don't, to me, it's not, I'm definitely not confident that the best algorithm wins. I'm more confident that the best business wins, for better and worse. And whether those two things can converge has a lot to do with the makeup of the company and who's in charge of the tech and who can explain it how. And you know, it is the alchemy of the company. Like, are your technologists and your biz dev people and your board and your investors, are they talking to you? Do they really understand each other? But you know, go back to the 1900s and the VHS Betamax to understand that there are many, many such examples where it doesn't, yeah. But then it begs a different, more philosophical question of what's the best algorithm, though. So I want to at least dwell on that for a second to say, back to this. If the essence of the human condition is this, I think at our heart, the essence of the human condition can be contained in this, in that we are separate in wholeness, and we live in that paradox. The infant comes into the world, and a second ago it was one, and it is now its own being, and it doesn't know that. It doesn't know one from two. You then go about to name the 10,000 things and say, baby, mommy, nose, your nose, my nose, and we put all the words on all the things. And then we spend our entire lives seeking that oneness, right? Like realizing that was there all along. But that is the thing. And all the best parts of being a human come from that paradox, like awe and wonder and grace, forgiveness, love. They all have that thing, that wholeness. They have the paradox and the contradiction. They accommodate the wholeness. I don't forgive you despite the bad thing you did. I expressly forgive you with the bad thing you did. I mean, and when you really get, if you've ever been forgiven, I mean, I don't know about you, I'm on my knees in awe that such grace even exists, because I was a shit, you know what I mean? Like, and you love me. So love, right? Love is not zeros and ones. It's way more complex and whole, where anything tech, so you talk about what's the best algorithm. Anything tech, by definition, in its essence, if the essence of the human condition is this, the essence of tech is binary. Binary is a hard separation. In logic, that is a hard or. It's not an and or. It's 0 or 1. Everything reduces ultimately to zeros or ones. So what does that do? It misses everything that's cool about the human condition. Now, what's amazing is how much cool stuff you can do with the zeros and ones. Like, we can do amazing stuff with the zeros and ones. I love tech. We're doing this, for God's sake, in a pandemic. We're having a conversation. Awesome. But who's driving the carriage? Like, is human wisdom guiding the zeros and ones? Or are the zeros and ones compressing our humanity and taking out all the good stuff, all the irrational, nonlinear, inefficient, unprofitable stuff? And if that's what we're left with, it's not a humanity I'm down with. You know, it's just what a boring, mechanistic bundle of biology, you know. So what's the best algorithm? I don't think we even, like, I can't wait to have, I would like to have the problem where we're talking about best algorithms being guided by our wisdom instead of slickest, fastest, most efficient. Like take driving directions. I couldn't live without them. I'm not a good spatial orientation kind of person. But where's the option for the most beautiful route? And like out here in the Bay Area, before driving directions, before the internet, y'all, when I first got to Stanford and I learned 101's over here and 280's over here, are two big highways between Palo Alto and San Francisco. Before you had Google Maps and you didn't know that it was 7 minutes faster today because of traffic, you just picked which one are you gonna take. And it's a bit of a crapshoot because in traffic, 101 can be a lot worse. And 280 will be not just as efficient, but it's prettier. And so you take your gambles. I would always take 280 because I might at worst lose 5 or 10 minutes, but I'm going to arrive so much more refreshed because there are no billboards, there's no noise, there's like, it's a beautiful ride. Where does that figure into the algorithm? And times that by a gazillion choices that are being made right now by the things that are driving our behaviors and that aren't taking into account the stuff that the markets don't count or value, or the algorithm. You know, we pray to the God of efficiency, but who on their deathbed said, remember that day when everything was so efficient? Like, nobody said that on their deathbed. Nobody said, remember that day when everything was so convenient, but Jeff Bezos is the richest man in the world selling convenience, you know?
We've got some more questions there for you to pick from.
Okay, let's see. I'm curious about quantum thinking. It's also new. It's also, we're still figuring out what it even means, but I think that that gets to the duality binary question in a big, big way. How's my time? Let's see. Commission on Presidential Scholars. Okay, so there's a couple of those about the commission, right? Is that what you mean by how's your time on the board been? To your point about institutions, was that a different board, Maddie?
No, I think they were asking about board of trustees at Stanford.
Okay, so what I'll say about my time on the Commission on Presidential Scholars, for this audience, is I'm sorry for your colleague at SCMU. It was a real privilege to have a tiny little window into the bigness of our federal government. And so to serve as a commissioner, I mean, even the framing of it, you serve at the pleasure of the president. It's just a pretty awesome thing, and not to poo-poo us or to diminish us or anything, but y'all, of all the many appointments that an administration is going to make, nobody on the street knows what the Commission on Presidential Scholars is. So this is not a prestige play, right? I was the first commissioner that had been a scholar, that had been a presidential scholar. So isn't that weird? Like when you think that would just be like where you start, but politics. Politics.
Slight historical footnote. You were the first one in a long time.
Okay, cool.
Back in the 70s, there were three.
Okay, I'm delighted to know it. The then Department of Education staff didn't know of one before me, so good. So I was the first one in a long time. I'll just give you a tiny window into what I learned. So I don't mean this in a partisan way, but it's not subtle what occurred, that us new Obama appointed commissioners, and I didn't understand this. This was just something I didn't know till I did it. I hadn't been in public service in this way before. The Obama appointed commissioners started, and it wasn't a full cohort. Like we had, I don't know, 10 of us or something like that. And then he kept rounding them out like a couple, 3 years down. You know, we didn't have a full complement of commissioners. So in that first year, the first ones of us appointed, it was going to be hard to be able to get through reading all the applications in good faith in any reasonable amount of time without some more people. Like, you just need more eyes on these things because it's just a lot of reading. And the Bush appointees who were outgoing, many of them were gracious enough to just keep serving. They just did another term with us. They did another round with us. So that we had this weird beginning where it was half outgoing Bush appointees and half us incoming Obama appointees. And they were the veterans and we were the newbies. I honestly didn't understand the import of that. But it became so clear to me in that first day, just sitting at lunch across the table from the guy from Arizona that was the Bush appointee, that, oh, we're actually, like, we're different in a meaningful way. And so I happened to be a green card holder. I wasn't a citizen when I was a presidential scholar, because my parents weren't, right? I was born in India, raised in Kansas, and I wasn't yet 18. So I was a legal immigrant, but I wasn't a citizen. And I was a presidential scholar. And I never wondered if I was eligible or anything. At some point, and at least at that time, the staff didn't know when it occurred and who did it. The rules changed and they stopped allowing non-citizens, legal permanent residents, from being eligible. And one of the first things that the Obama appointees wanted to do was reverse that back. Because if you're 16, if you're 17, that's not really up to you. And if you're 17 and you've just kind of been doing what was asked of you and getting the grades and being a good citizen and wanting to give back, then maybe we want to, that's exactly who we want to recognize, as opposed to where your parents happen to have, given birth to you. So, but we couldn't do it until we had we couldn't do it with the Bush appointees in the room, basically. We couldn't change that back so just as a tiny window into the consequential nature of administrations changing, when you start to play that out over all the different, whichever side of that debate you're on, it's consequential that you can keep this or you can change this in all the little nooks and crannies. The other thing I'll say is that the Obama appointees it was a remarkably diverse group of people. And that was different too than the outgoing group. In different axes. I don't just mean exterior phenotype, which was also true, gender, race. But we had a deaf person. We had people who'd been in public sector or private sector, we had age strata, decades difference. We had, a titan of industry or a civil rights icon. It was, so that was cool, and it wasn't what I witnessed. So that's just like my experience on the commission, besides maybe what might be obvious, which is it's pretty rewarding to just get to read about outstanding 17-year-olds across the country, because it's a beautiful lens, it's a beautiful, hopeful lens on the country. It's a snapshot, hopeful lens on the country when the news is always going to tell you all the things that are wrong. And this is the generative narrative of hope of every state, every territory, there is promise, So besides the stuff of the actual work, which was reading applications and selecting, which we did individually and collaboratively, and we'd calibrate together and talk about values hierarchies and how do you pick and things like that. It's intrinsically subjective choices that we just make. There was this meta part, the mechanics of it that I was new to and I was naive to, and I learned a lot.
Well, if I could just jump in for a second, I think also when I did my time in DC, I met you and I found out that you were my commissioner who had picked me. So I was like super excited to see you here tonight and to join tonight. So
I love that. That is so cool. As for Stanford board, though, Maddie, I would just say, boy. So I love it. I love it because this is an institution that has given me so much and my family so much, and I hope we're paying. We're able to contribute back. So it's just nice to be of use, or it's nice to even try. like, wait, you think I might be of use? Let me try to be of use. That's just good. It's just good. But in a more abstract way than my personal sentiment and gratitude for Stanford is my question about institutions broadly, higher ed in the mix. And Stanford has a unique trajectory. It's a unique point in its trajectory because in its 120, 30 years, 25, 30 years, it's only in the last single digit years that Stanford as an institution is sort of unequivocally ascendant. Like when I went there, it was an unimpeachably great school. But if you ask somebody in Taipei, what's the best American university? And I say this with air quotes because there's just, I reject all the best when it comes to higher ed. There was just this currency that Harvard had that was because they've just been around for hundreds of years and they have the eminence that is, I don't know, we all know it, it's the brand, right? Why that matters, I envy and am wistful for the days when we were not unequivocally ascendant, because it's a fundamentally different position to be in the sort of pole position than to be anyone but that one. And being that one, there's a binary change that happens. It is just different, and how you need to show up is different. And that doesn't, and nothing that you've been taught and none of the things that have gotten you to where you are the things that are good for where you need to be there. So what I'm curious about is how do institutions remain true to their highest best use, remain relevant, remain useful, and not just continue to rationalize their own sustenance, but I mean be useful for the hundreds of years. Because when it happened at Yahoo too, like when you go from no one's ever heard of you and they think you're a chocolate drink company to you're the it girl, now there's a fundamentally different thing that happens in every interview to hire somebody. Are they here for the gold rush or are they here for the project? And before the gold rush, they were here for the project, and now you got to discern. So with Stanford, is it an ego thing, or is it a status thing, or is it a prestige thing, or is it about something that's unique about this culture that fits you and meets you? And who are we, and are we knowing who we are in that? And so it's an identity crisis. I like the question of how do we stay mindful and self-reflective and relevant, and meaning also how do we shift as we need to shift, and how do we change as we need to change. And I think that requires a kind of radical humility and radical curiosity that there's a reason few institutions have lasted for centuries. And when I think about the ones that have lasted for centuries, they're all cautionary tales in one way or another. So how do you, I like that. I'm just curious about that. I think it says something central about humans and groups of humans and institutions. And with all my gratitude for the place, I am so unabashedly proud of its promise. And I am also acutely aware of hints of arrogance or breathing our own fumes, and I want to know, how does that happen? Like literally in the room, when do we start telling ourselves stories that we believe? And what interrupts that, and what keeps us radically humble, and what keeps us radically curious and outward looking and in a service orientation and not a self-sustenance orientation. So I just get to do that all the time, and I am still proud. Like I think we're doing a good job trying. I think if someone has a chance to do it, I feel like we might. I mean, or else I wouldn't be doing it. But I'm not saying we're perfect, and I'm not saying, I don't know, frustrating. Yeah. So I just love it.
Well, let's do another couple of questions here, and maybe some of the people have been very quiet, like Kimberly or Amanda or Margaret or Matthew might want to join in and ask a few here. We try to keep these to about an hour and a half, otherwise everyone gets exhausted, and particularly our guests. So any other questions from some of the folks who haven't had a chance to ask any yet?
I'm just reading too while you're doing that.
No questions on my end. Thank you for the thought, though. I did want to take a moment and gush, just because I think what 8 years ago now. You so kindly approached me and introduced yourself as also my commissioner. And anyway,
I love that.
It's such a, in a sense, a blessing. Fast forward, we're all here, and I'm still getting to learn from you and hear about your reflections, and along with everyone in this room. So thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you for saying so. Thank you for connecting the dots. That's great. That's beautiful.
And anybody else? Amanda or Margaret? We haven't heard from you. All right. You want to scan through the questions and see if there's any one or two more there you might want to touch, and then maybe we'll try to wrap up here at about 10.
Yeah, and in case I'm a bad skimmer, feel free to call it out, like if you see it and it hasn't been addressed, because I'm reading slowly.
Well, we did have a lot of things on your comment about deathbed sayings. So, yeah, but I was always taught the one you didn't want to say was "I wish I had."
Well, I mean, I'll just make a personal note because it is such a big thing I've learned. So I like to talk about it because what's the point of learning something if you can't pass it on? When my dad died, it was beautiful, and I didn't know that could be like that. I didn't know death could feel beautiful. And it goes back to this thing about with Yahoo, like the one thing I knew was I wanted to leave well. And what he showed me was we speak so much about what is a good life and how do we live well and the good life. But in Western culture, it's totally absent to talk about how to die well. And I do think it's as important. Well, the gift of him dying well was for everyone left, that the peace, the satisfaction, he did his work. He finished his business, here, so that as he was going and when he went, there was peace. It was peace in the room. And you just can't fight peace with resistance. It's not an energy that's invited. Peace invites peace. And so it made it, but that's all him, right? He had to do all the work to know I've done what I need to do here. And it is good. And it really was, I mean, the epic arc of his life, we could write a movie about it. It's not me, and I just got to be his daughter. This is a man who, tiny and humble and soft-spoken, as you can imagine, with his Indian accent, teaching in the University of Kansas mathematics. He left India on a Fulbright, was the only person in his family to leave the country and just forge a new path here. So like I said, you leave your entire gene pool and everything you knew to make a life in a place that you've never been for a future, not even for your own life, but for the future generation. And one of his best friends in India before leaving, as a young faculty member, one of the two youngest faculty members at the University of Punjab in Chandigarh, where I was born, even though we're from the South in Tamil Nadu. He was teaching up in the North when I was born. One of his close friends, because they were both young faculty members on Punjab at the time, was this guy Manmohan Singh, who would then go on to become the finance minister of the country in a pivotal time in the late 20th century, and then ultimately would become a prime minister in this century. And but none of that could have been known. So he leaves this country of origin to forge a life here, and just a little pin in that friendship of his early faculty days. And the couples became friends. He got married, Singh got married, and the two couples, my parents and they would travel around the world and things like that. And we stayed in their home when I was 5 years old in India, etc. And then later in life too, actually. And then fast forward on his deathbed, he is in his bedroom in Palo Alto, California, and the nurse wheels over the computer screen so he can watch the video of President Obama with his arm around my big brother, pointing to my brother having been confirmed unanimously by the Senate, who had never done anything unanimously, that Senate, and certainly not a judicial confirmation. It was the first judicial confirmation to break the dam finally after years of this block. But my brother was, you know, right forces conspired, and he was confirmed 97-0. And so he got to see that, and he got to see President Obama putting his arm around his son saying, this is my favorite guy in the country right now because he's making me look good. And within that span of a month, literally bedridden, you know, his deathbed, the final phone call he receives in his life was from Manmohan Singh, who was the then Prime Minister of India, saying, I just want to check on you and I want to congratulate you on Sri's, you know, on judgeship. Now just think about that arc of a life. You can't write that. That's a cinematic script that's not even believable, you know? These two countries and just one little life and kind of planting a seed and what you might make possible. And so that is to say that he had good reason to be at peace, but I think most of us probably have good reason to be at peace and we don't know how to realize it. So that's what I like. I don't have anything on my bucket list except that I do want to die well. So I got to figure that out, you know.
You know, I'm not entirely sure how we can, you know, follow that. That's sort of a good end to things. Now, if you'd like to play your saxophone, you know, I'm sure everyone would love to hear you. Otherwise,
I would never inflict that on you.
Any other last questions? I'm hearing a lot of silence. So thanks very much. We really appreciate all your time. And this has been wonderful. And we did record 95% of it. We missed that first 5 minutes, but that'll be available for other people who can't be here. And I hope, as John mentioned, that maybe you can come back and be more involved with the Presidential Scholar Association.
You can step up from Stanford.
That's right. That's right. Enough great.
And don't forget to talk to Wendell Pierce. And with regard to your talk, I've heard a lot of great talks, but what really stands out for this is the amount of wisdom in what you said. I think especially us older folks are like, wow, yeah, these are things we've thought about or we have avoided thinking about it. So I just view from, you know, the aged here. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Be well. Be well. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thank you,
so
Maddie
much.
and Matt.
Thanks, Matt and
Wow,
Maddie.
we really appreciate you guys putting this together.
Great job.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Maddie.
Of course. Bye, you guys.
Marissa.
Have a great night.
Thank you.
Oh, also, Susan, I saw your email and I'm sending you a little something so you can ping that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Good
See you
night,
tomorrow.
everyone.